If you think the court jester was just a harmless clown in silly clothes, think again. In the brutal halls of medieval castles, the jester was the only man allowed to mock the king to his face, and the only one who might get away with treason, hidden behind a joke. Kings laughed at his tricks in public, but behind locked doors, they trembled at what he knew. They called him Ivor the Laughing Shadow. Nobody remembered his real name, not even Ivor himself. He grew up filthy and hungry, picking pockets in market squares, eavesdropping on drunk nobles behind tavern walls. By 17, he could mimic a bishop's sermon, forge a merchant's seal, and slip poison into a goblet without leaving a trace. When a traveling baron found him mocking soldiers for coins, he realized this filthy boy could be more than a street rat. He could be a weapon wrapped in bells. Soon, Ivor stood beside the king's throne, painted smile wide, hat jingling as he mocked lords and bishops alike. At feasts, he told jokes so sharp they drew blood. In the council chamber, he turned secrets into riddles that made traitors squirm. The courtiers hated him, but the king adored him. Or so the fool let him believe. Because Ivor knew everything, who was cheating on whom, which cousin wanted the crown, which knight was loyal, and which one hid a dagger under his cloak. He wrote it all down in a leather book stitched into the lining of his jester's cloak. Rumor said he could ruin a dozen noble families with a single page. At first, the king thought it was amusing. Power made him believe he controlled the fool. But as rumors of rebellion grew and enemies crept closer, fear replaced laughter. The king called Ivor into his chamber one winter night, candles flickering like dying stars. He demanded the book. He begged, threatened, promised gold and a castle by the sea. Ivor just laughed, too loudly, too long. He leaned close and whispered, "Your Majesty, my tongue keeps your crown on your head. Kill me, and every secret I carry will dance on other tongues by dawn." That night, the king ordered his guards to arrest the fool at sunrise. But by then, Ivor was gone. Some claimed he fled to a rival kingdom, selling secrets for sanctuary. Others swore he was found floating face down in the moat, bells still jingling in the dark water. But on the night the king finally died, poisoned at his own banquet, witnesses swore they heard faint laughter echo through the stone halls as the crown rolled from his lifeless hand. After Ivor, no king ever truly trusted a jester again. They dressed them in motley and made them dance, but never let them whisper too close to the throne. Because every king learned one truth the hard way: a fool with secrets is the deadliest man in the castle. Ivor's disappearance left a wound that no royal guard or loyal advisor could stitch shut. Whispers spread faster than plague in the castle corridors. The fool had fled with names, betrayals, and buried sins scribbled on scraps of parchment only he could decode. Nobles who once smirked at his insults now woke drenched in sweat, fearing a knock at midnight. Some bribed servants to swear Ivor was dead. Others sent assassins into every neighboring kingdom, hoping to silence a tongue they no longer controlled. Meanwhile, the new king, the old one's half-brother, crowned in a rush after that suspicious banquet death, did something none before him dared. He banned jesters from the court entirely. He replaced laughter with silence. No riddles, no jokes, no bright motley costumes dancing between grim armored knights. The throne room felt colder for it, but the king slept easier, convinced he had cut out the infection. But power hates a vacuum. With no official fool to keep secrets buried under laughter, rumors found new voices. Servants gossiped in the kitchens. Pages eavesdropped behind tapestries. Drunken knights whispered to barmaids about the king's hidden vices. Without a single fool to absorb the scandal, suspicion turned outward, and suspicion is poison. In a royal court. In taverns far from the palace gates, traveling players began performing the Ballad of the Laughing Shadow. They painted Ivor as half-demon, half-prophet, a spirit who punished prideful kings and greedy lords. In these verses, he wore no mask of bells, but a crown of secrets, haunting nobles in their dreams. Each time a noble died mysteriously, or a scandal ruined a house, someone would mutter, "Ivor's ghost did it." Years passed, but the fear didn't die. So in secret, the king's advisors hatched a plan to control what they could no longer erase. They recruited orphans, thieves, beggars, children with sharp eyes and quicker tongues. They taught them tricks, riddles, and the art of telling truth so cleverly it sounded like nonsense. Then they dressed them in bright fool's garb and planted them in rival courts. Spies disguised as jesters, jesters disguised as ghosts of the Yule past. Everyone laughed at them, no one suspected them, just the way the king's council wanted. But one problem remained. What if the new fools became like Ivor? What if a single clever clown gathered enough secrets to threaten the crown again? To keep control, the king's men crafted a brutal solution. Every new jester sworn to royal service had a hidden mark inked beneath their collar, a symbol only the king's executioner knew. The message was simple: if you talk too much, you disappear before dawn. Still, fear clung to the velvet chairs and marble halls like mildew. Some swore they heard soft bells at night when no fool was on duty, a shadow moving just behind the throne, a hushed chuckle in a locked room. And though no one dared speak it aloud, every lord and lady knew the court had fools again, but the throne would never be safe from the last one who laughed. The years rolled on, and the kingdom's archives quietly bloated with parchment documenting the spies in motley. The coded jokes slipped to nobles, the whispered warnings given behind wine-soaked curtains. The jesters had become a living network, laughing shadows binding the court in threads stronger than any iron chain. Yet among this new breed of royal fool, one stood apart: Bram. He was not born a royal spy, but an orphan, plucked from the gutters when he was caught mimicking the old king's stammer for a few copper coins. A noble passing by recognized something sharper than mimicry in the boy's wide eyes, the spark of a mind that could slice truth from lies while pretending to jest. They taught Bram the old fool's tricks: how to juggle secrets, how to hide poison in a punchline, how to pry a confession from a drunken duke by laughing at the wrong moment. But what they did not teach him, what no master could teach, was how to fear power. Bram never did. He grinned at kings as if they were drunk farmers, laughed at generals until they clenched their swords, and whispered truths that made priests cross themselves twice. Soon whispers returned to the great halls. He's like Ivor, too clever, too bold, too dangerous. But the king couldn't get rid of him. Bram had something Ivor never did: leverage. He didn't just know secrets, he kept proof. Letters, coded lines of riddles, hidden away in catacombs beneath the city's ancient churchyard. And he let the king know: if my bells ever stop ringing, the parchment starts singing. Some nights, guards claimed to see Bram alone in the old gardens behind the palace, giggling at the marble statues as if they answered back. A few said he spoke to Ivor's ghost, swearing that the first fool had taught him every last trick from the grave. Others said Bram was the ghost, or worse, the devil's echo, wearing jester's bells to mock the mortal crown. The new king, a man hardened by betrayals, decided to bait the trap. He offered Bram gold, land, even a title, a fool with a knighthood. All Bram had to do was stay silent and loyal. For a while, Bram played along. He wore silk instead of rags, drank the best wine, and made the court roar with jokes about other kingdoms' misfortunes. But fear has a scent that no perfume can mask. Bram sniffed it every time the king laughed too hard, or the guards followed him too closely. He knew the day would come when the crown would try to bury him deeper than Ivor, with or without his secrets. So he prepared one last joke. He called it the Jest Eternal, a trick so cruel and clever it would outlive any king, any crown. And when Bram finally vanished, leaving only a trail of ink and bells behind, the kingdom learned too late: no king rules a jester who knows how to haunt the living long after death's applause fades. Bram's plan, whispered only to a handful of terrified kitchen boys and an old mute scribe, was more dangerous than any jest he'd ever told. He called it the Jest Eternal, a final trick so perfect that not even the king could punish him for it. Every evening, Bram performed as usual, juggling knives, mocking ministers, hinting at scandal. But behind those bright colors, he moved like a phantom through the castle's hidden passages. He bribed the guards with cheap wine and secrets about their mistresses. He paid the maids to accidentally leave the royal ledger open on his table. Everything was information, and information was a weapon. One freezing night, after a banquet that lasted until dawn, Bram slipped into the royal archives. He stuffed pages into his clothes, records of bribes, proof of false wars, orders to silence dissent. With this, he didn't just have gossip, he held the king's soul in his stained hands. The next morning, with sun streaming through the frost-covered windows, Bram stood behind the throne and whispered in the king's ear. Witnesses swore. They saw the king's face drain of blood, while the Bobo grinned behind him like a demon come to collect a debt. That afternoon, the court gathered for Bram's greatest performance yet. Instead of juggling or limping for laughs, he stood perfectly still in front of nobles and foreign envoys. With a flick of his wrist, he scattered the stolen papers into the air like confetti. Each page carried proof that the king was not God's anointed shepherd, but a greedy butcher hiding behind holy robes. Gasps echoed through the marble hall. Some fainted, others wept. A few knights drew their swords, but no one dared strike Bram down in front of so many eyes. The king lunged forward, screaming for the guards. But Bram, nimble as a cat, slipped through the velvet curtains and vanished into the servant corridors he knew better than any lord. By nightfall, half the city was buzzing about the king's crimes. Doors slammed shut when soldiers came knocking. Even the clergy stayed silent, waiting to see who would fall next. Bram didn't escape to another kingdom. That would have been too simple. He reappeared 2 days later in the main square, perched on the statue of the first king's horse. His bells jingled in the cold wind as he spoke to a gathering crowd. He didn't beg for mercy or riches. He told jokes about power, about lies, about every noble who ever mistook him for a harmless fool. As the royal guards approached, swords drawn, Bram laughed so hard he could barely breathe. "Fear the man with nothing to lose," he shouted. And when they dragged him down, the people cheered, not for the king's men, but for the Bobo who made the crown tremble. And so, the jest eternal was born, a single mad performance that outlived any king's decree. Because every whispered rumor after that carried Bram's grin behind it, and every ruler who crowned himself feared just one thing, that another Bobo might be listening, smiling in the shadows, ready to laugh last. For 2 sleepless nights, the king paced the cold floors of his private chamber, candles burning low while shadows of Bram's laughter danced along the walls. Every whisper in the hallway sounded like betrayal. Every creak in the floorboards rattled his brittle nerves. His guards doubled, tripled, but no lock could keep out the memory of that fool standing above the crowd, shredding royal secrets with a flick of his wrist. Outside the castle, the people's faith in the crown crumbled faster than the king's. Sanity. Market vendors repeated the Bobo's jokes under their breath. Children painted crude puppets with the king's face and made them bow to toy jesters. Even foreign merchants began to offer deals only if the crown paid up front. No more trust in royal promises when a jester had proven how cheap those promises were. Inside the council chamber, advisors argued like dogs over scraps. Some demanded Bram's head on a pike to remind the people who ruled. Others whispered that killing him now would turn him into a martyr, a holy fool. They wanted the king to issue a decree, to bribe the churches, to hang a scapegoat instead. But the king knew none of it would silence the ghost of Bram's grin. He was losing control, and worse, he knew everyone could smell it. Meanwhile, Bram was everywhere and nowhere. Rumors placed him hiding in the graveyard, preaching sermons to thieves under moonlight. Some claimed he dressed as a monk, slipping into cathedrals to chuckle behind bishops' backs. One rumor said he'd fled to the mountains to live among wolves, laughing at the king from the shadows of the forest. All of it might have been true, or none of it. But fear didn't care about the truth. Fear fed on possibility, and Bram had planned it that way. The stolen papers were gone, scattered, burned, copied 100 times, and passed from peasant to merchant to priest. No single throat could be cut to bury the secret now, and every rumor, every cackle in a dark tavern stoked the fire. 1 icy morning the king, sleepless and half mad, gathered his last loyal knights. They swept through the town like a plague, smashing doors, dragging families into the snow, demanding anyone who'd ever laughed at a fool's joke point the way to Bram. People lied, people vanished, people died. But the more they hunted, the more they proved Bram's point. That terror grows when truth hides behind iron and gold. As the sun set, the city walls seemed taller than ever, but the crown had never felt smaller. The king watched the flames of his burning city from his highest tower, clutching a goblet of wine that tasted like ashes. Somewhere out there, Bram's laughter still echoed, not in alleys or churches, but in the minds of every subject who now knew their ruler could bleed. The royal sleep was gone forever, and tomorrow the fool would have the final word. Dawn broke heavy and gray over the castle walls, as if the sun itself hesitated to shine on a kingdom ruled by fear and rumor. Inside the royal hall, the king slumped on his throne, eyes bloodshot, lips cracked from muttering curses through sleepless nights. His crown tilted slightly, an accidental symbol of a ruler whose power no longer sat straight. Around him, guards and priests waited in tense silence, each wondering if today would be the day the fool returned to claim the last laugh in person. Outside, the city breathed like a single restless animal. Merchants whispered news of fresh arrests. Housewives traded tales of royal soldiers beaten in dark alleys by mobs chanting Bram's name. Children carved dolls with crooked hats and painted tears of gold on their wooden faces, a reminder that secrets, once freed, could never be caged again. But while the king poisoned himself with paranoia, Bram moved calmly among the people, hidden in plain sight. One moment a beggar with a painted face leaning on a stick. The next, a masked preacher murmuring half-truths in the marketplace. To some, he was a ghost. To others, a saint. And to the king, he was the nightmare that would not die. That morning, as bells tolled for morning prayer, Bram made his final move. Disguised as a lowly monk, he slipped through the castle gates behind a procession of friars delivering winter alms. No guard recognized the slight hunch in his back or the silent grin hidden beneath the cowl. Step by step, he crossed the marble halls where nobles once spat at his jokes. Now they cowered, wondering if he might appear behind their gilded doors. At the throne room's doors, 2 guards blocked his path. Bram paused, bowed his head, whispered a prayer no god would claim, and when the guards asked his name, he lifted his head and smiled that cursed smile. The guards hesitated. That hesitation was all Bram needed. He didn't draw a dagger. He didn't swing a blade. He simply laughed. A long, rolling laugh that spilled through the marble corridor like spilled wine. The sound froze every servant. In place, echoed off the stone, crawled through tapestries and into the throne room where the king stiffened like a man stabbed in the heart. Bram stepped through the doors, one hand raised in mock blessing. The king rose, crown slipping from his sweat-slick hair. No guards lunged forward, no knights defended him. The courtiers pressed themselves against the walls, desperate not to be seen taking a side. In a voice that carried like a funeral bell, Bram spoke not to the king but to the people crowded at the doorway behind him. Behold your ruler, a man who feared a fool more than he feared the truth. He drew from his robe the final scrap of parchment, the king's last lie, and tossed it like confetti into the air. Pages fluttered down onto the throne like a mocking snow. The king collapsed to his knees, crown rolling into the shadows. Bram turned his back on him, the greatest insult a jester could give, and walked out, his laughter trailing behind him like a promise that the age of blind loyalty had ended. Outside the castle, a city waited, and the fool's final jest had just begun.